My name is Odessa, and at 29, I had long accepted my place in the family ecosystem. I was the sturdy, dependable oak tree in the garden, strong, quiet, and largely ignored unless someone needed shade. My brother, Dorian, was the prize-winning rose bush, flashy and delicate, requiring constant attention, admiration, and, most importantly, financial fertilizer. For years, my parents, Gareth and Philippa, had laughed at my career choice, a special education teacher, a profession they deemed noble but pitifully compensated. Their laughter reached a crescendo last Christmas when they gifted me a budgeting spreadsheet software while handing Dorian the keys to a new luxury sedan. I never imagined that their derision would be the catalyst for a journey that would lead me from a classroom of hopeful children to a gilded cage, tutoring a boy who didn't exist in the eyes of the world for a man who could buy it. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I tell you how my paltry teacher's salary led me to a life beyond my family's wildest dreams, hit like and subscribe to hear more true stories about finding your worth when others refuse to see it. My life before everything changed was defined by the quiet joy of small victories. My small, rent-controlled apartment in Chicago was a testament to careful budgeting and a love for secondhand treasures. It smelled of old books and the potting soil from my windowsill herb garden. The highlight of my week was the breakthrough moment with one of my students, a nonverbal child finally making a sound, a student with dyscalculia correctly solving a long division problem. These were the riches my family couldn't comprehend. They measured success in stock portfolios and European vacations. I measured it in cognitive leaps and newfound confidence in a child's eyes. My family operated in a different universe. My father, Gareth, was a senior financial planner at a respectable but unremarkable firm. He spoke of wealth management with the gravity of a brain surgeon, yet their own finances were a precarious house of cards, constantly threatened by my mother's social aspirations and my brother's disastrous business ventures. My mother, Philippa, treated her life like a performance, with our suburban home as her stage. Every piece of furniture, every dinner party was designed to project an image of effortless affluence they simply didn't possess. Dorian, at 26, was their magnum opus. He was a self-proclaimed crypto evangelist and NFP visionary, a career that seemed to involve spending my parents' money on fleeting digital fads while cultivating a wardrobe of designer streetwear. He treated my profession with a particularly sharp brand of condescension. "Still molding the minds of the youth for pocket change, Odie?" he'd ask at that final, fateful Christmas dinner, smirking as he dangled the keys to his new car. "Someone has to do it," I'd replied, my voice tighter than I intended. My father had laughed, a booming, dismissive sound. "Well, we all know it won't be you funding our retirement home." The gift of budgeting spreadsheet software was the final, stinging punctuation mark on a lifetime of being told my choices were second-rate. That night, lying in my childhood bed, surrounded by trophies and awards Dorian had won, and I had been expected to applaud, I made a quiet vow. I wasn't going to change who I was, but I was going to change how I was valued. The next day, I updated my professional profile on a niche educational platform, highlighting my specialization in teaching gifted children with unique learning challenges. I didn't expect anything to come of it. It was a small act of defiance, a quiet assertion of my own expertise. I had no idea that I had just lit a fuse. 3 months later, an email landed in my inbox that I almost deleted as spam. The subject line was simply, "A unique educational proposition." The sender was an anonymous account from a high-security email service. The message was brief and cryptic. "We are seeking a private educator with your specific qualifications for a singular long-term residential assignment. The compensation is substantial. The discretion required is absolute. If you are interested in learning more, you will be contacted by a representative. Do not reply to this email." My first thought was that it was a scam. My best friend, Kenna, a cynical journalist, agreed. Sounds like the beginning of a horror movie, Odie. Next, they'll ask you to meet in a dark alley with a briefcase of unmarked bills. But something about the professionalism of the language, the sheer confidence of it, intrigued me. 2 days later, a woman with a crisp British accent called. She introduced herself as Miss Albrecht and explained she was the chief of staff for a private family. She wouldn't name them. She wouldn't say where they lived. She asked me a series of probing questions about my teaching philosophy, my views on privacy, and my ability to handle high-pressure situations. My potential employer values privacy above all else. This position would require you to sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement that is binding for life. You would live on the estate. You would have no contact with the outside world that is not monitored. Your salary would be $500,000 a year with all living expenses covered. I dropped the phone. I picked it up again, my hand shaking. Did you say $500,000? That is the starting salary, yes, Miss Albright confirmed, her tone unwavering. If you remain interested, a car will be sent to your address tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to take you to a private airfield. You will be flown to the interview site for a one-day evaluation. You may, of course, refuse at any point. This was insane. It was a life-changing amount of money, the kind of sum my father and brother threw around in their fantasies. But the conditions were draconian, a gilded cage. I need to think about this. Of course, Miss Albright replied. The car will be there tomorrow at 8. We hope you will be too. I didn't sleep that night. I paced my small apartment, my mind a whirlwind of fear and possibility. This was a ticket to a different life, a life where I would never again have to listen to my family's condescending remarks. It was also a potential trap, a leap into a bizarre, unknown world. I thought of my students, of the joy I found in my work. Could I give that up? Then I thought of Dorian's smirk, of my father's laughter, of the budgeting software sitting on my desk. By 7 a.m., my decision was made. I packed a small overnight bag, my heart pounding with a terrifying sense of adventure. The car that arrived was a black windowless SUV, as cliché as Kenna had predicted. The flight was on a small, luxurious private jet. I was the only passenger. We landed 2 hours later at a small airstrip carved into the side of a mountain, surrounded by a dense forest of pine and fir trees. The air was crisp and cold. Another SUV was waiting. We drove for 30 minutes through a winding private road until we reached a pair of immense iron gates. They swung open silently, revealing a long driveway that led to a breathtaking sight. The house, or rather the estate, was a marvel of modern architecture, a structure of glass, steel, and dark stone that seemed to emerge organically from the mountainside. It overlooked a vast, serene lake, its surface like a silver mirror. I was led into a grand, minimalist living space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the mountains. A man stood by the window, his back to me. He was tall and lean, dressed in a simple gray cashmere sweater and dark trousers. When he turned, I was struck by his eyes. They were a piercing shade of gray, intelligent and weary, like he'd seen too much of the world. Ms. Petrova, thank you for coming. His voice was quiet but commanded attention. I am Peregrine Hawthorne. Peregrine Hawthorne. The name wasn't familiar, which in itself was unusual for a man of obvious immense wealth. He gestured to one of the stark white sofas. Please, sit. He didn't sit himself, but continued to stand by the window, studying me with an unnerving intensity. Miss Albright had been the warm-up. This was the main event. I have read your file extensively, he began, his voice even. Your undergraduate thesis on alternative communication methods for gifted nonverbal children was particularly impressive. He had read my college thesis. The level of vetting was staggering. You are wondering why you are here. It wasn't a question. I have a son. His name is Raphael. He is 9 years old. He is a genius. He can perform complex mathematical calculations in his head and has a photographic memory. He is also cripplingly anxious, largely nonverbal, and has not been in a traditional school setting for 3 years. He paused, his gray eyes fixed on mine. The world, Ms. Petrova, is a loud and dangerous place. I have created this sanctuary to protect him. But protection is also a form of isolation. He needs a teacher, not just an academic instructor, but someone who can build a bridge for him to the world without forcing him to cross it before he is ready. I believe you are that person. The sincerity in his voice, the raw paternal fear beneath the billionaire's polished exterior, cut through my own anxiety. This wasn't just a job. It was a mission. This was the ultimate special education challenge. "May I meet him?" I asked. A flicker of surprise crossed Peregrine's face. He seemed to have expected more questions about the salary or the isolation. Of course. He led me down a long, quiet hallway to a room that was less a child's bedroom and more a personal library and laboratory. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A large telescope was pointed at the window. In the center of the room, a small, dark-haired boy sat on the floor surrounded by an incredibly complex model of a city built from thousands of tiny, interlocking pieces. He didn't look up as we entered. "Raphael," Peregrine said softly, "this is Ms. Petrova. She's a teacher." Raphael continued to meticulously place a tiny girder on his skyscraper, ignoring us completely. I didn't approach. I simply sat down on the floor, a respectful distance away, my legs crossed. I didn't speak to him. I just watched his work. The model was a stunningly accurate replica of downtown Tokyo, complete with miniature cars and streetlights. "That is the Nakagin Capsule Tower," I said quietly, not to him, but to the air. "A fascinating example of Japanese metabolism architecture. I've always wondered how they managed the cantilevered stress on the individual pods." For the first time, the boy paused. His small hands hovered over the model. He slowly turned his head and looked at me. He had his father's gray eyes, but they were wide with a mixture of curiosity and fear. He didn't speak. He simply picked up a single unattached capsule piece and held it out to me. It was an invitation. I took the piece, my heart doing a strange flip. "Thank you," I said softly. We sat in silence for another 10 minutes before Peregrine cleared his throat. "We should let Raphael get back to his work." As we walked out, I glanced back. Raphael was still looking at me, the empty space in his model city waiting. Back in the main living area, Peregrine's demeanor had changed. The weariness was still there, but it was joined by a glimmer of hope. "You are the first person he has voluntarily engaged with in 6 months, he stated. "He's not broken, Mr. Hawthorne," I said. "He just speaks a different language. My job would be to learn it." "The job is yours if you want it," he said, the offer now solid and real. "You would start in 1 week. You would be given a private suite of rooms, access to any educational resource you require, and a staff to assist you. Your only focus would be Raphael." I thought of my life back in Chicago, my comfortable apartment, my friends, my freedom. Then I thought of the boy in the room down the hall and the look in his eyes. It was the same look I saw in my students at school. A bright mind trapped behind a wall of anxiety, waiting for someone to show them how to build a door. "I'll take it," I said, the words feeling more right than anything I had said in a long time. My first week at the Hawthorne estate was a study in disorientation. My living quarters, a 3-room suite with its own library and a balcony overlooking the lake, were more luxurious than any hotel I had ever stayed in. A silent, efficient staff catered to my every need,
from laundry to meals, which were served in my suite unless I was dining with Peregrine. The isolation was the hardest part. My cell phone had no service, as promised. Internet access was restricted to a monitored laptop, and all outgoing and incoming emails were screened by Miss Albright. I was allowed one 30-minute pre-scheduled video call with Kenna each week. "It's like you've joined a secret society," Kenna said during our first call, her face pixelated on the screen. "Or been abducted by a very wealthy, very handsome alien. Are you okay, Odie?" "I'm more than okay," I told her, and it was the truth. The work with Raphael was the most challenging and rewarding of my career. I spent the first few days simply coexisting in his space, reading on the floor while he built, occasionally commenting on his architectural models. I brought my own sketch pad, drawing the rare birds I saw from the window. On the third day, he silently walked over and placed a book in my lap, a detailed schematic of a jet engine. He pointed to a complex diagram, then looked at me expectantly. It was a test. My father was an amateur mechanic, and I had inherited his love for understanding how things worked. "That's the high-pressure turbine," I said, tracing the diagram with my finger. "It spins the compressor, which forces air into the combustion chamber." Raphael listened, his expression unreadable, then returned his book. But the next day, he brought me another, and another. Our lessons began not with the curriculum, but with a silent exchange of information, a shared exploration of the complex systems that fascinated him. I slowly began to introduce new things. I brought a large slab of clay into his room. He ignored it for 2 days. Then, when he thought I wasn't looking, I saw him tentatively poke it with his finger. By the end of the week, he had sculpted a perfect miniature replica of the Parthenon. I realized he wasn't just a genius. He was a kinesthetic learner who understood the world through building and touch. The nonverbal communication was a wall built of anxiety, not a lack of ability. Peregrine remained a distant but constant presence. We had dinner together twice a week, formal affairs where we discussed Raphael's progress. He was sharp, intimidatingly intelligent, and fiercely private. He never spoke of Raphael's mother or his own past. The estate was his fortress, and he was its solitary king. The other staff members were equally professional and remote. The head of security, a stern, watchful man named Ronan, seemed to be everywhere at once. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Petrov, ran the household with quiet, iron-fisted efficiency. They were polite, but there was an invisible wall between me and them. I was an employee, a highly paid one, but an outsider, nonetheless.
After a month, I called my parents to tell them I had taken a new job. The lie I had prepared was simple and vague. "It's a private tutoring position," I told my mother. "It's residential, so I've moved out of my apartment. It's a great opportunity." "Private tutoring?" I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "So, a live-in nanny then. Is the pay at least better?" "It's better," I said, the understatement of the century. "Well, don't expect us to come visit you in the middle of nowhere," my father said when he got on the line. "When you decide to get a real job in a real city, let us know." Dorian's reaction was a text message, "LOL nanny, have fun wiping noses." The conversation was a painful reminder of the world I had left behind, but it also solidified my resolve. Here, in this strange, isolated place, my skills were valued beyond measure. I was not a disappointment. I was a necessity. I was finally in a place where my worth wasn't a matter of debate. Months bled into a quiet, focused routine. Raphael and I developed our own unique rhythm. Our days were a mix of advanced physics, architectural history, and silent, collaborative building projects. He began to speak, at first in single words, then in short, precise sentences, usually to ask a complex question or point out a flaw in a design. Each word felt like a monumental victory. I discovered he had a dry, wicked sense of humor that appeared in flashes, a shared glance over a badly designed schematic, a tiny smirk when I couldn't solve a puzzle he'd created. He was not just a mind, he was a boy, and I was beginning to feel a fierce, almost maternal affection for him. My relationship with Peregrine also deepened, evolving from employer-employee to something more akin to partners in a shared vital mission. Our dinners became less formal, our conversations straying from Raphael to art, philosophy, and world events. I learned he was a voracious reader, a brilliant strategist, and a man haunted by a past he refused to speak of. I saw glimpses of it in the sadness that sometimes clouded his eyes, in his obsessive focus on security, in the way he never, ever mentioned his late wife. The fortunes, however, began to show cracks. One night, a security alarm blared through the estate, a jarring, terrifying sound that had me rushing to Raphael's room. Ronan and his team were there in seconds, their movements swift and professional. It was a false alarm, a sensor tripped by a deer. But the incident left Peregrine rattled for days. His paranoia, which I had first seen as the eccentricity of the ultra-rich, seemed rooted in something deeper and more specific. Then came the incident with the drone. I was outside with Raphael, sketching the landscape, when he suddenly pointed to the sky. A small black drone was hovering high above the tree line, a tiny, menacing insect in the vast blue sky. Before I could even fully register it, Ronan's team was on the move. The drone was disabled and fell from the sky. And Peregrine had the estate on complete lockdown for 2 days. Corporate espionage, he said at dinner that night, his voice tight with a barely controlled rage. Rivals trying to get a look at the technology I'm developing here. But his explanation didn't feel complete. The level of his fear seemed personal, not just professional. It felt like it was centered on Raphael. The first real clue came from an unlikely source. Mrs. Petrov, the stoic housekeeper, had a rare moment of vulnerability. I found her in the library one afternoon looking at a framed photograph on a high shelf that I had never noticed before. It was a picture of a beautiful, dark-haired woman with a radiant smile. That was Mrs. Hawthorne, she said softly, her Russian accent thick with emotion. Elena, she was like sunshine. This house was different when she was alive. She was very beautiful, I said, trying to be respectful. She was the daughter of Nikolai Volkov. The name meant nothing to me. Mrs. Petrov saw my confusion. Before Mr. Hawthorne built his technology empire, he was an energy. He and Volkov were the 2 biggest rivals in the global market. They were enemies. It was a great scandal when she ran away with him. Her family disowned her. They said he had stolen her. A forbidden love story. It explained so much about their isolation. She died in a boating accident, yes? I asked gently, recalling the one brief mention I had found in a background search. Mrs. Petrov's face darkened. That is the story, she said, her tone implying there was another. She looked around nervously, as if the walls were listening. There are things in this house, Ms. Petrova, that are best left undisturbed. She quickly walked away, leaving me with 1,000 new questions. Elena Hawthorne was not just a beloved late wife, she was the daughter of her husband's greatest enemy, and her death was not as simple as it seemed. I was no longer just a tutor, I was a resident in a gilded cage full of secrets, and I was beginning to suspect that the security measures weren't just to keep the world out, but to keep something dangerous inside. The conversation with Mrs. Petrov shifted my perception of the estate from a sanctuary to a fortress under siege. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way Ronan would walk the perimeter every evening without fail,
the silent, almost invisible security staff who blended into the landscape, the tension that would descend on the household whenever a delivery truck made its way up the long driveway. This wasn't just about protecting a reclusive billionaire's privacy. It was about protecting him from a specific, known threat. My focus remained on Raphael, but now a new urgency underscored my work. Building his confidence, his voice, and his understanding of the world felt less like an educational goal and more like a survival imperative. I began to subtly incorporate lessons about situational awareness and problem-solving into our projects. We built models of castles and discussed defensive strategies. We studied codes and ciphers. I was teaching him to be not just smart, but resilient. One afternoon, while working on a complex robotics project, Raphael had a moment of uncharacteristic frustration. The coding wasn't working, and he slammed his small fist on the table. "It's wrong! All wrong!" he muttered, a rare outburst. "It's okay if it's wrong," I said gently. "That's how we learn. We find the bug." "My mother said there are no bugs, only bad designs." The mention of his mother, the first time he had ever spoken of her, hung in the air. I kept my voice soft, casual. "She was a designer?" He nodded, his attention still on the robot. "She designed boats, fast ones. She said our boat was the best design, the fastest." He paused, his hands stilling. "But the fire wasn't a good design." Fire? My blood ran cold. A boating accident was the official story. A boating accident doesn't necessarily involve a fire. "There was a fire?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Raphael looked up at me, his gray eyes clouded with a distant, painful memory. "The engine went boom. It was loud. Mama put me in the little boat. She told me to close my eyes. But I didn't. I saw the other boat." "What other boat, sweetie?" His face crumbled, the anxiety returning like a storm. He shook his head, retreating back into his shell of silence, and wouldn't say another word about it. But he had said enough. An explosion. Another boat. This was not an accident. Alina Hawthorne's death was a murder, and her 9-year-old son was a witness. I wrestled with what to do. Should I tell Peregrine what Raphael had said? Would it re-traumatize the boy? Would it put me in danger? I decided to wait, to observe. I started paying closer attention to the staff, to the fault lines in the household's perfect facade. Ronan, the head of security, was fiercely loyal to Peregrine, his devotion almost zealous. Mrs. Petrov, the housekeeper, was maternal and protective of Raphael, but also seemed terrified of something. Then there was the rest of the small staff, a chef, a few groundskeepers, and a young, ambitious tech assistant named Kaylin who helped Peregrine with his research. Kaylin was the newest member of the staff, hired just a year ago. He was smart, efficient, and seemed to worship Peregrine, but there was a watchfulness in his eyes that I found unsettling. My weekly calls with Kenna became a lifeline, but I was bound by the NDA. I spoke in hypotheticals. "Kenna, if you were investigating a cold case, a suspicious death, where would you start?" "The money," she said instantly. "Always follow the money. Who benefits financially?" Who benefited from Alina Hawthorne's death? Her family? The Volkovs, who hated Peregrine? Did her death somehow give them leverage? Or was it something else? Peregrine's work was in next-generation battery technology, a field worth trillions. A corporate rival? My chance to dig deeper came unexpectedly. Peregrine was called away on an urgent off-site business meeting for 2 days, a rare occurrence. He left Ronan in charge and asked me to keep Raphael on his normal routine. The night before Peregrine was due back, a violent storm rolled in, knocking out the estate's main power.
The backup generators kicked in, but for a few chaotic minutes, the entire security system, including the internet monitoring, went down. It was the opening I needed. I went to the main library, telling Mrs. Petrov I was looking for a book for Raphael. Peregrine's main computer was there, a sleek, powerful machine I had never been allowed to touch. It was password protected, of course, but I knew Raphael had watched his father use it hundreds of times. I went to his room. "Raph, I need your help. It's a puzzle." His eyes lit up. I described the login screen. He closed his eyes for a moment, his fingers tapping an invisible keyboard in the air. Then he spoke a string of 16 random-seeming characters. It worked. I was in. I had maybe 10 minutes before the system was fully rebooted and Ronan's team would notice the unauthorized access. I didn't know what I was looking for. I typed Elena into the search bar. Files flooded the screen. Most were photos, videos, personal correspondence, but one folder was different. It was labeled Aegis Initiative. It was encrypted. I tried another search. Volkov. I found a trove of legal documents, threats from Nikolai Volkov's lawyers. But then I found something else, a subfolder containing detailed financial reports. Payments. Large, regular payments made to a shell corporation. I traced the corporation's registration. It led to a holding company, and from there, to a single name on the board of directors. A name I knew. A name that made my world stop. Kaylin, the ambitious tech assistant. And the payments had started 3 months before Elena's death. My heart hammered against my ribs. Kaylin, the quiet, deferential tech assistant, was a mole. But was he working for the Volkovs or someone else? I didn't have time to dig deeper. The lights in the library flickered as the main power grid stabilized. I quickly logged out, erasing the search history, and slipped back to my room just as the estate systems came fully back online. My hands were shaking. I had crossed a line, from tutor to spy, and there was no going back.
The next morning, Peregrine returned. This storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and deceptively peaceful. He looked exhausted, but his eyes lit up when Raphael ran to greet him, a rare, spontaneous show of affection. Watching them, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about uncovering a secret anymore. It was about protecting this fragile, hard-won family. I had to tell him. That evening, after Raphael was asleep, I found Peregrine in his study. "We need to talk," I said, my voice more forceful than I intended. He looked up from his work, surprised by my tone. I told him everything. Raphael's memory of the fire and the other boat, Mrs. Petrov's story about the Volkovs, the drone, and finally what I had found on his computer during the blackout, the payments to a shell corporation linked to Kaylin. He listened without interruption, his face becoming a pale, rigid mask. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a dangerous, glacial calm. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute. "I hired Kaylin myself," he said finally, his voice a low, rough whisper. His resume was impeccable. He came from a rival tech firm. I thought I had stolen their brightest star. Instead, they planted a viper in my home. "You think he works for that firm?" "No." Peregrine stood and walked to the armored window, staring out at the dark lake. "The shell corporation you found, I know it. It's a front for Nikolai Volkov. I've been tracking it for years." He turned back to face me, and the raw grief and rage in his eyes made me take an involuntary step back. I have always known Elena's death wasn't an accident. The investigation was corrupted. Witnesses disappeared, evidence was lost. Volkov has limitless resources and no conscience. I could never prove it, but I knew he was responsible. He killed his own daughter to punish me for taking her. The confession was devastating. He had been living with this certainty, this unutterable pain for years, alone. "And now he's after Raphael," I whispered. "Raphael is the sole heir to his mother's trust, a trust that was set up by her grandfather, independent of Nikolai.
It controls a 40% stake in the Volkov energy empire. Nikolai can't touch it, but if Raphael were to have an accident, the shares would revert back to the main estate, to him. He's not just trying to hurt me, he's trying to consolidate his power. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The security, the paranoia, the isolation, it was all part of Peregrine's desperate attempt to keep his son safe from a predator who had already killed his wife. Kalen is his agent, Peregrine continued, his voice hardening. He was sent here to find a weakness in our security, to create an opportunity. The drone, the false alarm, those were tests, probes to see how we would react. What are we going to do? We are going to let him believe he is succeeding. Peregrine's eyes narrowed, the grief momentarily eclipsed by the cold fury of a brilliant strategist. We are going to set a trap, and you, Miss Petrova, are going to be the bait. The plan Peregrine outlined was both terrifying and ingenious. We would use Kalen's own assumptions against him. He saw me as a naive teacher, an emotional weak point in an otherwise hardened fortress. We would make him believe he could exploit me to get to Raphael. He will try to get close to you, Peregrine explained, his voice a low murmur as we sat in his soundproofed study. He will feign sympathy, friendship. He will try to make you feel like an ally against my paranoid behavior. Your job is to let him in, gain his trust, and find out what he is planning and when. Ronan, the stoic head of security, was brought in on the plan. He was initially furious that I had accessed Peregrine's computer, but once he understood what I had found, his anger shifted to a grudging respect. His team immediately began a covert, deeper surveillance on Kalen, monitoring his communications and tracking his movements. He's been using a satellite phone to make scrambled calls from the far end of the lake, where the estate's jammers have a weak spot, Ronan reported, a day later. We can't break the encryption, but we know he's communicating with someone. My role began the next day. I accidentally ran into Kalen in the kitchen. He was charming, handsome, and radiated an earnest intelligence. It was easy to see how he had fooled Peregrine. Miss Petrova, Odessa, right? I'm Kalen. I feel like we're the only two people under 50 in this whole place. He smiled, a warm, disarming smile. It does feel a bit like living in a museum sometimes, I replied, feigning a conspiratorial whisper. We fell into a casual conversation. I complained mildly about the isolation. He sympathized, talking about how difficult it was to be cut off from friends and family. He was playing his part perfectly. Mr. Hawthorne is a genius, he said, lowering his voice, but he's intense. The security can be a bit much, don't you think? It's for Raphael's safety, I said, giving him the loyal employee response. Of course, of course. He backtracked quickly. But it must be hard on the boy, never leaving, never seeing other kids. He had found his angle, Raphael's well-being. He was positioning himself as the one who, like me, cared about the boy's happiness, not just his physical safety. Over the next 2 weeks, we developed a careful, manufactured friendship. We'd have coffee, we'd talk about books and technology. He was smart, and I found myself genuinely enjoying our conversations, a fact that disturbed me. I had to constantly remind myself that every word he spoke was a lie, every shared smile a manipulation. He would subtly probe for information about Raphael's routine, my level of access, the weaknesses in the estate's security. I would in turn feed him a carefully curated mix of truth and misinformation that Peregrine and Ronan had prepared. I told him about Raphael's fear of the water, a lie designed to make a boat-based plan seem less viable. I complained about a blind spot in the security cameras on the West Terrace, a location now swarming with invisible sensors and hidden agents. The psychological toll was immense. I felt like I was living a double life, performing for an audience of one. Every interaction was fraught with tension.
I recorded every conversation with a micro-recorder Ronan had given me. At night, I would meet with Peregrine and Ronan to analyze the recordings, dissecting Kaylin's every word, every hesitation. During these late-night strategy sessions, the lines between employer and employee blurred further. We were a team, united against a common enemy. I saw a different side of Peregrine, vulnerable, trusting, and fiercely protective. He, in turn, started treating me not as staff, but as a confidant, an equal. The breakthrough came when Kaylin believed he had finally won me over. We were walking by the lake, the location Ronan had identified for his satellite calls. "I'm worried about you, Odessa," he said, his voice laced with concern. "This place, Peregrine's paranoia, it's not healthy, for you or for Raphael." "What can I do?" I asked, playing the part of the trapped, compassionate woman. "Raphael has family besides his father," he said carefully. "His grandfather, Nikolai Volkov, is a powerful man. He's been trying for years to get custody, to give his grandson a more normal life. Peregrine has painted him as a monster, but he just wants to know his grandson." It was the first time Volkov's name had been explicitly mentioned between us. "I have a way to get a message to him," Kaylin continued, his eyes searching mine for any sign of deception. "To arrange a meeting, to let him see Raphael, just once. It would be a humanitarian act, Odessa. You could be the one to finally bring peace to this family." The bait was laid. He wanted me to help him abduct a child, framing it as a heroic act of family reunification. I don't know. It's too risky," I stammered, feigning fear. "The riskiest thing is leaving that boy in the hands of a man who is slowly crushing his spirit," he said passionately. "Think about it. When you're ready to do the right thing, let me know." That night, in the study, the three of us knew we were close. "He's going to make his move soon," Ronan said, his voice grim. "He's trying to recruit you to be his inside man. He'll want you to disable an alarm or get Raphael to a specific location at a specific time. He thinks my primary concern is Raphael's emotional well-being," I reasoned. "He'll propose a plan that looks like a harmless meeting, not a kidnapping." Peregrine looked at me, his face etched with worry. "This is getting too dangerous, Odessa. We can stop this now. Ronan can apprehend him." "No," I said, surprising myself with my own conviction. "If we just arrest him, Volkov will send someone else. We need to catch them in the act. We need to get Volkov himself. We need to end this, for good." Ronan and Peregrine exchanged a look. I was no longer just the bait. I was part of the trap. The plan Kaylin proposed was exactly as I'd predicted, deceptively simple and framed as a rescue mission. He approached me 3 days later, his demeanor a mix of urgency and conspiratorial excitement. "I've made contact," he whispered, pulling me aside in the library. "Mr. Volkov is willing to come himself. He just wants to see his grandson. There's a cove on the north side of the lake, accessible by an old logging road. It's a blind spot in the estate's radar coverage. A blind spot we had intentionally fabricated for him." "How could we possibly get Raphael there?" I asked, my voice filled with feigned anxiety. "Next Tuesday, Peregrine has his quarterly board call. It's a 4-hour video conference. He'll be locked in his study, completely distracted. You always take Raphael for a nature walk in the afternoons. We just walk a little farther than usual." He laid out the details. A boat would be waiting at the cove. Volkov would be on it. I would bring Raphael. They would talk for 30 minutes, and Volkov would leave, promising to begin formal legal custody proceedings. No one would get hurt. "He's given his word, Odessa," Kaylin insisted, seeing the doubt I was performing. "This is about a grandfather wanting to see his only grandchild." "And if I do this, what happens to me?" I asked, pretending to be worried about my own fate. "Volkov is very generous. He will arrange for you to be relocated. a new identity, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You'll be a hero. The promise of a reward was the final piece. He wasn't just appealing to my conscience, he was appealing to my self-interest, the way a corrupt person assumes everyone else is corruptible. I need to think about it, I said, letting him see the conflict in my eyes. You have until Monday to decide, he said, giving me a final, encouraging smile. Don't let fear stop you from doing the right thing. That night, the study felt like a war room. Ronan had a satellite map of the estate spread across the large table. The logging road is here, the cove is here, he pointed. My team will be in position in the surrounding woods 24 hours in advance. We'll have thermal imaging, aerial surveillance, and a sniper team. The moment Volkov steps on our land, he's ours. Peregrine paced the room, his face a tight mask of controlled fury. Volkov won't come alone. He'll have his own security. They'll be armed and dangerous. So will we, Ronan said calmly. But Odessa, your part is the most dangerous. You will be walking into the lion's den. We'll have a panic button for you, a communication device, but if things go wrong, they won't. I said, my voice steady. Kylan trusts me. He doesn't see me as a threat. That's our biggest advantage. Peregrine stopped pacing and looked at me, his gray eyes filled with a conflict of emotions. I should never have asked this of you. You are a teacher, not a spy. I am Raphael's teacher, I corrected him gently. My job is to protect him. This is just a different kind of lesson. The next 4 days were the longest of my life. I had to maintain my performance for Kalen, feigning indecision, then slowly, reluctantly agreeing to his plan. I had to continue my lessons with Raphael, my heart aching with the knowledge of the danger we were about to put him in, even if it was a controlled scenario. Raph, next Tuesday, we're going to play a special game, I told him, framing the event in terms he could understand. It's a strategy game, like chess. There will be some new people, and our job is to be very quiet and follow the plan exactly. Can you do that? He nodded, his eyes serious. He didn't know the stakes, but he knew to trust me. On Monday, as planned, I gave Kalen my answer. I'll do it, I whispered to him in the hallway, my voice trembling with practiced fear. Relief washed over his face. I knew you would. You're a good person, Odessa. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. That evening, my family, who had been silent for months, suddenly reappeared. My mother called. Odessa? Honey, it's Mom. Her voice was strange, overly sweet. Your brother, Dorian, has gotten himself into some trouble. That crypto business of his, it turns out it wasn't exactly legal. He owes some very dangerous people a lot of money. We had to mortgage the house again. We're going to lose everything. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. What do you want, Mom? I asked, my patience worn thin. We need help, honey. A loan. Just until we can get back on our feet. Your father said your new employer must be paying you very well. They had no idea. The real world, with its petty dramas and financial woes, felt a million miles away. I can't talk right now, Mom. I'm in the middle of something important. Nothing is more important than family, she cried, the familiar guilt trip starting up. I have to go, I said, and hung up, my mind already back on the far more dangerous game at hand. The call, however, served as a stark reminder of what I was fighting for. A life free from manipulation, free from the endless, draining obligations of a family who saw me only as a resource. Tomorrow, I wasn't just protecting Raphael, I was fighting for my own future. Tuesday dawned bright and clear, a beautiful day for a betrayal. The air in the estate was thick with an unspoken tension that only I, Peregrine, and Ronan's team could feel. To anyone else, it was a normal day.
The chef prepared breakfast, the groundskeepers tended the gardens, and Kalen went about his duties with a new, barely concealed energy. He gave me a subtle, confident nod when he passed me in the hallway. He thought he was in control. At 10 a.m. sharp, Peregrine went into his study for his board call, a fiction we had carefully constructed. Ronan was in the security hub, a hidden room filled with monitors watching every angle of the estate. I was with Raphael, our backpacks filled with snacks, water, and a high-frequency panic button in my pocket. "Ready for our nature walk?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Raphael nodded, his small hand gripping mine. He knew this was the game day, and his usual anxiety was replaced by a focused seriousness. We followed our usual path into the woods, but today I steered us onto the less used path that led towards the North Cove. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call sounded amplified. I knew Ronan's men were out there, invisible in the trees, but the feeling of being exposed was immense. Kalen was waiting for us where the path forked. "Perfect timing," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Are you ready for your big adventure, Raphael?" Raphael shrank behind me, and I put a protective arm around him.
"He's a little nervous," I said. "He'll be fine once he meets his grandfather," Kalen replied, his tone growing impatient. "Let's go. We don't want to keep him waiting." He led us down the overgrown logging road. The air grew damp and smelled of lake water and pine. After a 10-minute walk, the trees opened up to a small, rocky cove. A sleek, powerful speedboat was moored at a dilapidated wooden dock. Two large, stone-faced men in dark suits stood on the dock, their hands held loosely at their sides. My heart pounded. This was real. Another man stood on the deck of the boat. He was older, in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that seemed out of place in the wilderness. Nikolai Volkov, his eyes, a pale, cold blue, fixed on Raphael. "So, this is the boy," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble with a thick Russian accent. He looked nothing like the grieving grandfather Kalen had described. He looked like a predator. "Bring him here," he commanded. Kalen took a step towards Raphael, but I held him back. "The agreement was to talk," I said, my voice shaking just enough to be convincing. "On the boat," Volkov said. "It is more comfortable." This was the part of the plan I dreaded. Ronan had warned me not to get on that boat under any circumstances. "No, we'll stay on the dock," I said, firmly. Volkov's eyes narrowed. He looked at Kalen, a silent, menacing question. Kalen's charming facade crumbled, replaced by a nervous urgency. "Odessa, don't be difficult. Just get on the boat." He reached for Raphael's arm. That was the signal. I squeezed Raphael's hand twice, our prearranged game over sign, and he immediately dropped to the ground, just as we had practiced. At the same moment, I slammed my heel down on Kalen's foot with all my weight. He howled in pain, stumbling back. "Now!" I screamed, pressing the panic button in my pocket. The world erupted. From the woods, Ronan's team emerged, clad in black tactical gear, rifles raised. A helicopter appeared over the treetops, its blades whipping the air into a frenzy. Volkov's two men on the dock went for their weapons, but they were too slow. Two sharp, distinct sounds from a sniper's rifle echoed across the cove, and they both crumpled to the ground, incapacitated but not killed. Volkov stood on the boat, his face a mask of disbelief and pure fury. He hadn't expected a small army. He had expected a teacher and a child. He turned to bark an order at the boat's pilot, but another figure emerged from the woods onto the dock. Peregrine. "It's over, Nikolai," he said, his voice ringing with cold triumph. Volkov spat a curse in Russian. He lunged for the boat's controls, but Ronan and two of his men were already storming the dock.
Kalen, seeing his escape route cut off and his benefactor cornered, made a desperate move. He grabbed me behind, pulling a small pistol from his jacket and pressing it to my temple. "Everybody back off," he screamed, his voice high with panic, "or she dies." The world narrowed to the cold circle of metal against my skin. I could feel his body trembling against mine. "Let her go, Kalen," Peregrine said, his voice dangerously calm, as he slowly raised his hands. "There's nowhere to run." "Shut up," Kalen shrieked, dragging me towards the end of the dock. "You're all going to let me go. I'm walking out of here." But I wasn't his only hostage. I saw Raphael, still on the ground, look at Kalen. His face, usually so anxious, was a mask of cold, focused anger. He picked up a rock, a smooth, heavy lake stone. "Bad design," he said, his voice clear and loud, and with a strength I never knew he possessed, he hurled the rock. It struck Kalen squarely in the back of the head. The blow wasn't hard enough to knock him out, but it was enough to make him cry out in pain and loosen his grip for a split second. It was all I needed. I dropped, tucking and rolling away from him as Ronan's team swarmed forward, subduing him in an instant. I lay on the rough wood of the dock, gasping for air, the world spinning. Peregrine was at my side in a second, his hands checking me for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice raw with a fear he no longer tried to hide. "I'm okay," I whispered. I looked over at Raphael, who was now standing, looking shaken but resolute. My brilliant, brave boy. He hadn't just been a witness, he had been a hero. As Ronan's team led a cursing Volkov and a whimpering Kalen away in handcuffs, I knew it was finally, truly over. The ghosts of the past had been captured, and the future, for the first time, felt safe. The aftermath of the Cove incident was both swift and silent. There were no headlines, no public trials. Peregrine Hawthorne's influence, combined with the irrefutable evidence of attempted kidnapping and conspiracy, ensured that Nikolai Volkov and Kalen simply disappeared. They were handed over to federal authorities who dealt with matters of corporate espionage and international crime far from the public eye. The Volkov energy empire was thrown into chaos, its stock plummeting as rumors of its leader's sudden retirement spread. The threat that had loomed over Peregrine and Raphael for years had been neutralized. The atmosphere at the estate transformed almost overnight. The oppressive tension lifted, replaced by a quiet, profound sense of peace. The invisible walls of the fortress seemed to dissolve. Peregrine's weariness began to fade, replaced by a lightness I had never seen in him before. He smiled more. He spent his afternoons not in his study, but outside with Raphael, teaching him to skip stones across the lake. Raphael, in turn, blossomed. The successful execution of our game had given him a new sense of agency and confidence. He spoke more, he initiated conversations, and he even started asking to learn about things outside of his usual interests. He wanted to learn about gardening from the groundskeeper, about cooking from the chef. The bridge to the world I was supposed to build for him, he was now walking across with bold, confident steps. My role, too, had fundamentally changed. I was no longer just his teacher. I was his protector, his confidant, a cornerstone of his new secure world. The lines between me and Peregrine had irrevocably blurred. We were no longer just an employer and his highly valued employee. We were partners who had faced a mortal threat together and won. Our late-night conversations in the study continued, but they were no longer about strategy and threats. They were about the future, Raphael's future, and increasingly ours. About a month after the incident, as the autumn leaves began to turn, my old life came roaring back. My phone, which I had started carrying again, buzzed with a frantic call from my mother. "Odessa, you have to come home. It's Dorian." Her voice was a hysterical shriek. What happened? "He's been arrested. The crypto thing? They're calling it fraud. They seized everything. We have to post his bail. It's $1 million. We don't have it. You have to help us." The news didn't surprise me. I had always known Dorian's get-rich-quick schemes were built on a foundation of sand. "Mom, I can't just produce $1 million. "Don't lie to me, Odessa," she screamed, the desperation making her cruel. "We know about your rich boss. Gareth saw your name in a financial report, some educational trust he set up. You're living in a palace while your brother is going to rot in jail." So my father was still tracking me, still viewing me through a financial lens. "After everything we've done for you, you owe us this. You owe your brother." The familiar refrain, the endless ledger of obligation, but this time it had no power over me. "I'm sorry for what's happened to Dorian. Mom, I truly am. But his choices are his own. I can't help you," I said, my voice calm and final. "You will regret this. You are no daughter of mine," she shrieked before slamming down the phone. The call left me shaken. Not with guilt, but with a weary sadness. They would never change. Their world would always revolve around Dorian's needs, and I would always be seen as a resource to service them. I told Peregrine about the call that evening. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to help them?" he asked quietly. "If it is a matter of money, I can—" "No," I interrupted him firmly. "This has never been about money. It's about a lifetime of being treated as less than. Giving them money now would just be paying for more of the same." He nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "Some family is a fortress," he said softly, "and some is a cage. You've just escaped yours." He was right. I had, and I was never going back. 2 weeks later, they showed up. I was walking with Raphael by the lake when the security gate camera feed pinged on Ronan's tablet. My parents and Dorian, looking rumpled and defeated, stood at the iron gates demanding to be let in. Dorian was out on bail, a bond apparently posted by a shady associate who now owned my parents' future. "Don't let them in," Peregrine said immediately, appearing at my side. But I looked at their desperate faces on the screen, a pathetic tableau of failed ambition. "No, let them in," I said. "It's time for them to see." They were escorted to the main house, their eyes wide with disbelief as they took in the scale of the estate. They were led onto the vast stone terrace overlooking the lake, where I was waiting. Raphael stood slightly behind me, his hand holding mine. Peregrine and Ronan stood a respectful distance away. My family stared at me, their expressions a cocktail of shock, envy, and dawning, desperate hope. This was a world beyond their comprehension. My nanny job was not what they had pictured. "Odessa," my father started, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This place, who is this man?" "This is my employer, Mr. Hawthorne, and this is his son, Raphael." Dorian, never one to be intimidated for long, found his swagger. "So, you landed a sugar daddy. Good for you. Now, about my legal fees." "Dorian, stop it," my mother hissed, before turning to me, her face arranged in a mask of maternal anguish. "Odie, honey, we are in so much trouble. Your brother made some mistakes. He committed fraud, Mom. He stole from people," I corrected. "He was trying to provide, to be a success, like you wanted." She gestured wildly at the magnificent view. "This is what you always wanted, isn't it? Money, success? You just wanted it for him, not for me." My father stepped forward, his face pale. "We need your help, Odessa. We are asking you, as your family, to help us. We will lose the house, everything." "The house you were going to mortgage to pay Dorian's bail?" I asked. "The house that has been a monument to your pride and financial irresponsibility for 30 years?
I took a deep breath, the cold mountain air filling my lungs. The last time we spoke, you told me I owed you. You recited a list of my childhood expenses. You made it clear our relationship was a transaction. So let's talk about it as a transaction. I walked over to a small table where I had placed a single document. I had a forensic accountant draw this up. It's an itemized list. On one side is the estimated cost of my upbringing, food, clothing, public school education. On the other side is the estimated financial disparity between your investment in me versus your investment in Dorian. I slid the paper towards them. Private schools, cars, tuition for colleges he dropped out of, failed business ventures, rent, credit card bailouts. By conservative estimate, you have invested over $700,000 more in your son than in your daughter. They stared at the paper, speechless. You also seem to be forgetting the income I brought in, I continued. From the age of 16, I worked. I gave you half my paycheck every week to help with bills. That's another $30,000. So if we're treating this as a transaction, it seems to me the ledger is more than balanced. In fact, you might owe me.
Dorian snatched the paper from the table, his face contorting with rage as he scanned the numbers. This is insane. You can't put a price on love. You're right, I agreed, my voice softening slightly. You can't. But you can put a price on a BMW. You can put a price on a failed NFT collection funded by a second mortgage. You are the ones who put a price on everything. I turned to my parents. You taught me from childhood that love and support were conditional, that they were resources to be allocated to the most promising asset. I just happened to disagree with you about who that was. I invested in myself. My mother began to weep, real, racking sobs this time, not the performative tears I was used to. We just wanted him to be happy, she whispered. And what about my happiness? I asked, the question of my lifetime finally spoken aloud. Did that ever factor into your calculations? My father, for the first time in his life, looked utterly defeated. The bluster, the authority, the carefully constructed facade of the successful patriarch, it was all gone. He looked like what he was, a scared old man who had bet on the wrong horse and lost everything. What do you want from us, Odessa? He asked, his voice barely audible. It was the first time he had ever asked me what I wanted. I want you to stop, I said. I want you to stop seeing me as a solution to your problems. I want you to stop making Dorian's failures my responsibility. I want you to finally, after all these years, see me. I walked back over to Raphael and placed my hands on his shoulders. This is my life now. This is my family, not by blood, but by choice, respect, and love, the kind you never gave me. I looked at Dorian, who was still staring at the spreadsheet as if it were written in a foreign language. I will not give you money. It would be gone in a week and you would have learned nothing. But I will offer you this. I pulled another card from my pocket. This is the name of a financial counselor and a therapist. They specialize in compulsive behavior and financial mismanagement. If you see them, if you complete a 1-year program with them and get a real, steady job, any job, I will help you create a structured plan to pay back the people you defrauded. I will not give you a handout. I will give you a path to redemption. But you have to walk it yourself. Dorian stared at the card as if it were a snake. Therapy? A real job? That's your offer? It's the only one you're going to get, I said. My father looked from me to Dorian to the magnificent house, and a flicker of something, a dawning painful understanding crossed his face. He walked over, took the card from my hand, and pressed it into Dorian's. You'll do it, he said. His voice rough with an authority I hadn't heard since he was trying to use it against me, but this time it was aimed at his son. It's time to grow up. They left shortly after, not with threats and anger, but with a heavy, somber silence. I didn't know if Dorian would take the offer.
I didn't know if my parents would ever truly understand the depth of the hurt they had caused, but I knew I had finally broken the cycle. I was no longer the dependable oak tree providing endless shade for a rose bush that couldn't grow on its own. I was a forest now, and I was choosing who could enter. 1 year later, I stood on that same terrace, but everything was different. A string of soft lights was woven through the railings, and the sound of quiet jazz music drifted from inside the house. Peregrine came to stand beside me, his hand finding my hand in a gesture that was now as natural as breathing. "You're thinking about them," he said, not as a question. I nodded, looking out at the calm, dark surface of the lake. "I got a letter today from my mother." Our relationship had evolved slowly, naturally, from partners in crisis to partners in life. We were a family, the three of us, built on a foundation of shared trauma and profound, quiet love.
What did it say? Dorian finished the program. He's working as a manager at a bookstore. He started paying people back a little at a time. My father is working part-time as a consultant. They sold the house and moved into a small condo. She said they're happy, happier than they've been in years. And you? How do you feel about that? I considered it. The anger was gone, replaced by a distant, peaceful sadness. I'm glad they're okay. I hope they find their way, but their path is not my path anymore. Inside, Raphael was showing Kenna, who had flown in for the weekend, a new architectural model he had designed. He was chattering away, explaining the structural engineering principles with a confidence that would have been unthinkable a year ago. He was enrolled in a special online academy for gifted children, and he was thriving. My own life was fuller than I had ever imagined. I was still Raphael's primary educator, but my role had expanded. Peregrine had made me a director of his philanthropic foundation, where I was developing a global program to fund innovative educational initiatives for special needs children. I was using my teacher's salary to change the world, backed by the resources of a man who saw my worth from the very beginning. My mother's letter ended with a question. "We know it is too much to ask for forgiveness, but we were wondering if you would consider coming for Christmas this year. It will be a small affair. We just want to see our daughter." "Are you going to go?" Peregrine asked, already knowing the answer. I shook my head. "No, my Christmas is here now." He squeezed my hand. My brother's mockery, my parents' disappointment, it all pushed me out of a life that was too small for me. I said, more to myself than to him. They thought my choice of career was a sign of my small ambition. They never understood that what I do isn't about the salary. It's about building something that lasts, just like you. He smiled, a real warm smile that still made my heart skip a beat. You taught me that my greatest value wasn't in being a resource for others, but in the unique skills I possessed. They laughed at my teacher's salary, but that salary was a reflection of a passion that a billionaire was willing to pay a fortune for. It was never about the money. It was about the worth of the work. As Peregrine pulled me closer, the warmth of his embrace a shield against the cold night air, I knew I was finally home. The family that had belittled me had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the motivation to find a place where I was not just needed, but truly, deeply valued, and that was a treasure beyond any price. Have you ever had a skill that others underestimated only to find it was incredibly valuable in a different context? What does success truly mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your own path. And remember, your worth is not determined by the opinions of those who refuse to see you, but by the impact you make on the world. Thank you for listening.